Please be seated. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a good lunch break. We are now going to continue with closing arguments. As I had explained to you at the beginning, the state gets to open and close the closing arguments since they do have the burden of proof. Ms. Dahl, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Judge. The defense has argued a whole lot of, that doesn't really matter. Look away, no big deal. That doesn't matter. Well, let me quote someone important to this case. The defendant. At 28:39 in his interview, he says, "It all matters, huh?" I know. As she is clearly, Detective Butcher, putting forth what they know. And it does all matter. The defense wants to pick apart each piece of the puzzle and say, look over here, it doesn't make sense, but when you put them all together, you have a very clear picture of what the defendant did. All of the evidence points squarely at the defendant. Now the defense wants to point the finger at Danny Vargas because he said, quote, "I hate cops." Well, let me share with you something they say back in North Dakota. Birds of a feather flock together, there are no swans in the sewer. It is not a surprise that another Mexican Mafia member has a similar outlook on life as the defendant. If Danny was the shooter, why was the defendant so concerned about Valeria snitching in his words? The defense can't decide if they like Lori Richardson or not. She's now testifying 5 years later, and you know memories fade. That is why law enforcement officers, they record their interviews, they write things down in reports, and you know that every single interview was recorded. They want her to be a liar and they want her to be telling the truth. But one thing she has said consistently, maybe not getting the names right, is it was the man seated behind her. And now we know that it was the defendant, Ramon Bueno. And that has been half-heartedly conceded in the defense argument. He was there, and he was seated exactly where Casey said he was and Lori said he was. You heard that in that world people are doing drugs like her, calling numbers for rides and getting gas money in return. And then you heard the defendant describe the world he lives in, flopping around at different houses, staying everywhere and staying nowhere, not knowing the names of people in this whole underworld. He lived in a world with people like Lori Richardson, and he chose her. This case is not about Lori Richardson. It's about the evidence in this case, to include the defendant who admitted that he was guilty when he was caught. Now, Lori gives you insight, but you know where they were all seated and who was taking the shots based upon the physical evidence in this case. The notepad, the physical description, the gunshot wounds, the firing across the roof of the vehicle. Now, Larry Martinez, the train conductor, he said he didn't see anything in the men's hands as they quickly walked across the train. Well, you know why? He told you. He was looking at a man who had been shot in the back and he could see the blood. Now, if that doesn't draw someone's attention, I don't know what would. Kendra Griffey, she told you how they determined the time. Remember, the surveillance cameras which you have for your review, they are also outside, and not only on the interior of the business. They looked at the timestamp, then they looked at the sunrise, they compared it, and they were able to calculate also based upon the hard drive the amount of time that was lost when there was an attempt to override it. What does Clint Davis provide to you? Now that was a point where the defense argued quite a bit because Clint Davis explains to you why someone like that would choose to kill someone like that. You know what the Mexican Mafia is now about. Maybe not prior to this trial. It's a world that many of you do not live in. But it's a world that he explained to you that there are two things that they do. One, there's a directive, you stay out of custody. Why is that? Because you're making money. You're sending that 25% tax back to the homies who are in custody. So that is one thing. And two, you do not go into custody, not only for the money making, because you're of no value anymore whatsoever. He's a recognized expert in the area of the Arizona Mexican Mafia. He served in public service for 27 years. The fact that a CV that he may or may not have wasn't presented to you means he's not qualified is a silly argument. You heard his qualifications. You had the opportunity to question them. He's a recognized expert. And he talked to you about fear. He talked to you about intimidation, power, and control, and the criminal objectives of the game. And he told you that killing a law enforcement officer is highly regarded in the defendant's world. It instills fear when a member does it. It provides prestige in the criminal underworld. And there has been no dispute that the defendant is a member of the Arizona Mexican Mafia. A dispute about whether Lori was in custody or not during one of the numerous interviews that was referred to by lawyers and law enforcement as a free talk is silly. There were multiple recorded interviews, and because she doesn't know a legal term, let's be clear. Let's be candid about the evidence in this case. Lori Richardson is not a legal beagle. Lori Richardson is not sophisticated. Lori Richardson was part of his world. And could she have become confused 5 years later? Absolutely. And you saw it happen in real time. But you also know what she consistently said right after this happened. And she was not trying to frame someone. And in fact, she wanted, quite frankly, nothing to do with this. She was afraid. She came in here because she had to come in here and tell you exactly what happened. But this case isn't built around Lori Richardson. Let's talk about the defense theory of the case that was presented to you. It does not make sense. That Danny Vargas is leaning up against the rear passenger side window. James Casey can see his hands. You know from Mike Beddow that a .357 Magnum revolver has a 6-inch barrel. You know, based upon the evidence, that Danny Vargas was wearing a white short-sleeved t-shirt. So his hands are up against the window. And you know that James Casey knows where every single one of those hands is in the vehicle, except for the right hand of Ramon Bueno. Ramon Bueno is the one who got the gun. If there was a huge movement to do exactly what the defense has argued, that, when James Casey is looking up and down very, very quickly between the paper and up and down, that would have been caught. There was not enough time for it to have happened the way the defendant would like you to believe. And you know that Officer Casey was very aware of the hands, because when he initially contacted Lori, it was the furtive movements in the back seat with the defendant and Valeria that caught his attention. That's when he turned and said, hey, window down, everybody show me your hands. We live in the greatest country in the world. Enough said. Very real, because of people that are sitting here today. You don't have to guess what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. It's provided to you. It's proof that leaves you firmly convinced of an individual's guilt based upon the evidence. Circle firmly convinced, that is a standard. You don't have to guess. Don't be distracted or confused. Focus on all of the evidence in this case. This case, again, is not about Lori Richardson. This case is about Ramon Bueno. He is seated right here. This is where you should be looking. Look at his interview. Look at what he did. He cannot be cleaned up. His own words betrayed him. He's the reason we're all here.
Thank you.